Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. In this episode, I'm thrilled to introduce to you an impressive serial entrepreneur and #1 Street Journal, USA Today, and international bestseller with a proven track record of guiding numerous individuals and organizations through the intricacies of team management and effective leadership, Robert Glazer. In this episode, Robert and I delve into the pressing issue that many marketers and marketing leaders are grappling with, which is complete job insecurity, right? We recorded this right on the opposite side of the Q4 big last grab revenue launches and campaigns, on the brink of Q1, which is also a time for hiring, but also a time for layoffs. And so we talked about what it is to feel the burden as an owner of an organization where you can't even ensure security and safety for your staff, but they desire and crave psychological safety to perform their best work. So let's dive in. Let's make it rain with Robert Glazer. Robert, welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Veronica.
I'm really excited to have somebody of your caliber on the show right now because the timing could not be any better. Your specialty, running teams, being a great, effective leader. Right before we push record, I was just telling you, I happen to work with a number of owners, small business owners, visionary CEOs, and also mentoring, guiding, and leading, marketing leaders. We're in an interesting time right now because we're recording this, just so everybody knows, we're recording this basically right after the conclusion of our Black Friday, Cyber Monday big campaigns, at one of the last big pushes for revenue grabs for a lot of companies. And depending on the industry that you're a part of, but the one that I oversee and that I get to have kind of backstage access to, it was not as fruitful as it has been years past. It's actually been one of the harder Black Friday seasons where a lot of my clients and people that I coach have not had successful campaigns.
Or they were successful by giving away all their margin.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I've had a lot of panicked phone calls and Slack messages and Voxers. And it's interesting because as a CEO myself, so are you, right? 5 times over. We're in positions where we want to give our team psychological safety to ensure that they'll be okay. But then if we're personally in the in-between where we don't even know how the conclusion of the year is going to shake out, how that brings us into Q1 next year. And then of course, Q1 is also traditionally a really great hiring season, but maybe it's not going to be in 2024. So I just want to pick your brain.
Yeah.
This is your world. You have these conversations every single day. How do leaders show up when there feels like so much uncertainty and things that we can't control?
It's a great question, and I think an appropriate one. It seems it's already started, and a lot of companies are planning some sort of end-of-year layoff or beginning-of-year layoff, and most of them are, look, we really staffed up at 2021, and our organization's size for growth and what we're seeing now just doesn't make sense. And so, we're seeing a lot of those, and this tends to be, unfortunately, the time of year because people are looking at their budgets, they're looking at the next year.
Yeah.
And otherwise, but I want to go back to something you said. I don't think leaders, psychological safety does not mean telling people that they are safe, right? My definition of that is, because it's used a lot, and I don't think not anyone knows what it means. I think it's used a lot and people aren't in agreement on a definition. So if you and I have trust, right, on a one-to-one basis, for me, psychological safety is sort of how do you walk into a team or organization and that exists from many to many. So you feel like you can ask questions, be honest, speak truth to power, and you're not sort of attacked for anything on that. It doesn't mean that things are always good or there aren't topics that are, dangerous or uncomfortable or otherwise. So a team or an organization with psychological safety is where everyone feels comfortable discussing these things kind of out in the open and having them. I don't think leaders, I know this sounds counterintuitive. It's not our job to tell people that everything's okay or that the world's okay. It's our job to tell them the truth. And so in I think a lot of cases, making sure people understand where the business is, where the scorecard, look, you're not trying to put pressure on people. If we don't do this, they'll lose their you'll lose your jobs. But you have goals, you have budgets, you have things. The best thing I think that you can give to people is a sense of agency or control, or like, look, here's what we need to do, and I need your help, and I'm open to the ideas, and we want you to come in and, be giving us those ideas and trying to solve the problem. But it's also the reality of says, look, if we're at these numbers and this is our budget, we're going to have to make some changes. Now, how would we do that? Well, we would look at this or otherwise. I mean, I think a lot of people don't want to worry people. And so they don't tell them the truth. And actually you set them up more to blindside them and kind of cause more harm. I always revert back to this concept called the Stockdale paradox, which came from Jim Collins's work in Good to Great, and Admiral Stockdale, who was, I think I just heard, other than John McCain, was like the longest prisoner of war, and he was tortured and all this bad stuff happened. When Collins was interviewing him, I think it was Vietnam, or was a different one. He said, look, I always knew I was going to get out, and I maintained that resolve, but I was also aware of the sort of realities, and I didn't obscure the realities of the situation at all, and that it was going to be really difficult. And when Collins asked him, hey, who didn't make it? He said, oh, that was easy. That was the optimists. They thought they'd be out by Christmas, and then Christmas came and they thought they'd be, and they sort of died of a broken heart. So his whole thing was, look, you have to have something to look forward to and otherwise, but you can't ignore the brutal realities of a situation. When COVID first hit, 30% of our business was sort of at risk overnight. Either companies went away or saying, look, we'll pay you next year, and stuff that just doesn't work if you're a professional service business. And we were really honest with employees. And look, a lot of employees, I would say if they were under 32 at the time, so maybe now 36, they had only seen 10 years of prosperity since they got out of college. They hadn't seen, and actually right before that, it was misery. So it's just a matter of where your goes back to, right? So they just never even seen a layoff or a downturn or otherwise. So we said to people, look, this is really bad, and this is what we're watching, and here are the critical levels, and here we'll have to make changes, because we didn't want to threaten them or scare them. We wanted to make sure we were trying to be honest about the realities, right? You can't lose 30% of your business and just keep everything the same.
And nothing changes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of people were like, you're tormenting us. You're kind of torturing us. Like, please stop. Why are you telling us all this horrible stuff? And we're like, look, we're just telling everyone the truth. As leaders, we're looking at this stuff daily. We're trying to make decisions. I always feel like humanizing leaders. Like, I am trying to do and my team the best that we can do for the most people. Looking at this information, you might not want to be in this situation. It's harder than it looks. That's not what I would say at the time. But a lot of those people who said, hey, why are you doing this to us? They were sort of like, why are you telling us all this stuff? And we just felt like we owed people the truth. Suddenly over the next couple of weeks, look, they had roommates, they were married, they had partners or otherwise. These companies hadn't said a thing. And then suddenly they were laid off, losing their jobs, like blindsided.
Yeah.
And people came back to us and they were like, oh, I get it now. Actually, thank you for telling us the truth and what's going on. I've talked to tons of people about this. The worst thing in the world, I think, is to be blindsided. And I know there are a lot of leaders out there. Look, people won't do their best work if they think there could be a layoff or otherwise or whatever. And they're scared. I get that. Look, we're taking the bad parenting of the world these days and trying to like remove all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's not our jobs. Like that's reality, and that's the world. But you talk to people who never got a warning sign, were told that things were fine, and then were blindsided. Those are the people who months later, years later, are most, I think, impacted negatively by those situations.
And I see that all the time, because what comes up a lot too is like previous workplace trauma, or
we ask people about on the onboarding. Everyone's got these crazy stories.
Crazy stories. Absolutely crazy stories. Okay, but I want to go back to what you said, because
that was a lot. So
no. There's actually some really good. There's always some great gems. So I work a lot with marketers, right? And so literally the definition, like our job description in summation, is to make it rain, like to make money.
Or to put a nice spin on it, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And then my husband works in corporate sales. So like literally in just the Romney household, we are having this conversation on a regular basis, that those that I am mentoring and guiding and coaching, and then literally his own workplace, they do say language like that. Look, if we don't hit our numbers, it absolutely does affect you. And they're saying it to the people who are in direct positions to make the numbers one way or the other.
Yeah.
In spite of like the arena changing in the Colosseum, the fighting in the Colosseum with the economy and price sensitive, consumers and everything that's changing. And so like, I am near and dear to individuals who are receiving literally word for word what you just described. So let's flip the narrative. Now we're no longer in the CEO or the manager's position, the one saying that language, which we're not big fans of. Now you're the recipient of that language. How do you handle it? How do you, to your point, how do you still show up and be a good team sport,
Well, first of all, I hope anyone giving that language is also saying, and here's what we're doing to help you, and here's how I can coach, and let me know where I can ever. Again, I am not going to obscure the reality. Look, if you're at half your quota, your job's at risk. I'm always amazed at how many people in sales don't know that or assume that. But you'd want a boss who is saying, look, what can we help you? Best practices, train. Can we get you stuff? Like how can I help you? I'm not going to take away the reality of it for you. So the most important thing on the other side, I think, would play to reverse on that. Like,
please,
can you help? Can you coach? Like, what resources are there? Focus on the organization's biggest problems. That was now I'm forgetting who I had the conversation with, but she wrote the book on that, on like, what do the best employees do? They focus on helping to solve their boss's biggest problems, the organization's biggest problems. And obviously in some of those situations, it's about you and your production or your quota, but
sure.
Generally you'll make yourself very useful if you start attacking your boss or the organization's biggest problems. But look, people that are trying, they're looking like they want to prove, they're asking the resources, they're doing the work, they're not acting helpless and like things are happening to them and they don't control. I think those are the people that leaders will give a little more leash to, right? They don't want to call it, if you think about time of death, right? You're trying to affect that manager, because a lot of times they've made a decision, like time of death has already happened, but they just haven't told you yet. You want them to believe that there's still a chance, in the immortal words of Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance.
You're saying there's a chance. Yeah. Hey, Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free Pathway to Promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode. Okay, but this brings up the point that you brought up earlier again too, which is like, speak truth to power. Okay, can we please talk about this?
Yeah.
Because have you ever seen the show? Now we're just going to, have you ever seen the show on YouTube? Actually, it's a YouTube series called Middle Ground.
No.
Okay, you'll like it. I highly recommend. So basically, the premise of the show is you take two wildly opposing belief systems,
like that,
and you put them across from each other. And can you find middle ground? And so some of the examples are like, flat earthers, round earthers, red Republicans, Democrats, pro-life,
seems like
pro-choice.
An endless list right now. Yeah.
An endless list. Yeah. And there's some really phenomenal episodes. And so I was watching this and I was really inspired by it. And I hosted an event once a year where I bring the CEO and what I call their rainmaker, right? Their marketing leader, and they both come to the event. So it's like a 2-person event. And the idea is to forge this relationship so that they can fruitfully make it rain for the organization. I was watching Middle Ground. I'm like, it would be fascinating if I did this social experiment. So I had all the CEOs line up on one side, and then I had all the rainmakers line up on another side. And the rules of the game was like, one side could volley a question to the other side, but the person who volleyed it, their counterpart, their duo, could not answer the question, had to be answered by everybody else. So if a marketer volleyed a question, their CEO could never answer the question. Only the other CEOs could answer the question to not bias the conversation.
Yeah.
So like, for example, marketers be like, well, how do you guys look at health and, benefits? And, or, CEO would be like, how often do you want me to talk about your pay and career? Like things like that. So like sensitive questions like that. And it would make it a little bit safer to go into that. But the one thing that becomes like glaringly obvious as we play this game, this social experiment, is a power dynamic that can never be negated. Like even when duos have worked together for years, I'm talking like 5 years, 10 years, like they're physically related to some way, like their husband and wife combos or their family members. But like at the end of the day, there is this employer employee dynamic, this power dynamic. One is paying your salary, one is receiving the recipient of that paycheck, that can't be negated. And so when you talk about speaking truth to power and adding the layer of power dynamic, like how does someone do that? Because it's so terrifying, even when there is good relationship rapport put in.
So it's a great question. And it's kind of a inverse answer. It is up to the organization to make it clear that it is safe to speak truth to power and to model that. I wouldn't make the assumption in a lot of organizations that people want that, or it actually you might look around and so the organization needs to create this first so that other people see it. They see people ask a tough question to the CEO and they say, that's a great question. They see in a meeting someone say something, call it out, and the leader says, thank you for pointing that out, right? It has to come from top down to create the conditions. It's not something that you can just do where it's not wanted. So yeah, look, you can try that. I mean, if you're a leader and you want to know if there's psychological safety on your team, here's a great little thing you can do.
Test.
Ask your team to do something that's fundamentally impossible and see who speaks up. Whether the task, the timing, like it just can't be done. Like that'll give you a pretty good test whether people feel comfortable saying something on your team.
Tell me when this happens. What have you seen? Give me a lay of the land.
To be fair, I've shared this with a lot of people. I actually heard of this once I was not leading teams anymore. So I have not had a chance to do it.
Man, I want to do it.
But I can imagine it looks something like this, right? So we need this campaign tomorrow with this, or, just totally.
Yeah.
And everyone either kind of smiles and goes, there's no way it's going to happen. Or someone says, that's fundamentally impossible. We couldn't hit that time frame, or we have to, what happens is either people say what they need to say in the room, or they probably smile, bleep, leave the room, and then have all the discussions outside of the leader, right?
With each other.
Yeah, with each other. He's fucking crazy. That's never going to happen.
That's really
But they don't want to say no. So it's not going to get done. They just don't want to actually say no to the leader.
Or, well, it's the same thing. Like I've thought about this test that you're talking about, but I've thought about it when it comes to like these unlimited PTO policies. The science has shown that people don't actually utilize them because they're terrified of being the outlier. I'm terrified of being the one that takes it too far.
Yeah, and millennials, and I'm just surprised, millennials and Gen Z, because of helicopter parenting, just really, I have heard I'm surprised, they just are stressed out by this policy and want examples of it. They want to know what to do. You ask a Gen Xer, they're like, this is great. I'm independent. I'll figure this out. They're not going to abuse it, but they're like, awesome. I have heard that this stresses out Gen Z not having this. So you might want to provide some guidelines around what that means, some examples. But I think it is extremely important, and this is my book, Elevate Your Team, that when leaders go on, they model it. So the CEO says, I'm going on vacation. There's a big difference between saying, hey, Veronica and team, I'm going on vacation, but here's my text, cell phone number. I'll be on Slack. You can reach me in the afternoon. I'll be around. I'll respond to everything, whatever. So, okay, that's not a vacation. There's another difference between saying, hey, me and Veronica team, my family and I are going on vacation next week. Like I've set up a bunch of things. Like you really shouldn't need to reach me. If it's an absolute emergency, I'll give you my wife's cell phone and text her. And then I saw a CEO who set up a thing, said, or you can email me at this alias, interruptmyvacation@company.com. So what they're saying is like, I'm going on time. I'm protecting it with my family. There shouldn't be anything important. If someone dies, here's a way to reach me, but it's really uncomfortable and you shouldn't want to do that. And that's a totally different, that is a way you would model for the rest of the team. That is, it's okay to take your vacation. We also have paid people to not check in and take a week offline because we're serious about, we want you to rest and relax. So this, again, top down. If leaders model that vacations are not really vacations, then everyone else will see the same way.
It's so true. Yeah.
If the CEO puts that out and they see them doing it multiple times, then it's okay. Again, you also need to set some norms, and we do. Unlimited doesn't mean forever. You got to get permission for 2 weeks in a row. Your work needs to get done. The team priorities need to get done. The company priorities need to get done, right? And if your vacation is getting in the way of your business, someone is going to say something to you. And so most smart things, figure out the right in between on that. And it's pragmatic too. You got to understand, a lot of companies are doing this because the whole thing of tracking and accruing vacation and paying it out is a huge pain in the ass. So they just want to not, it's just a whole area of administration that like the company would rather not put resources against. But again, ask, is it 2, 3 weeks, 3, 4 weeks? Again, if you're a high performer, it's probably more flexibility and latitude that if you're someone who's not meeting your goal. A lot of this requires just emotional intelligence, right? If you're at 50% of your quota, you probably don't want to take 6 weeks vacation. You probably also shouldn't be surprised when that comes up as a problem, right? So all of these things require emotional intelligence. Unfortunately, 80% of us think we're emotionally intelligent, and only 20% of us are, according
I was just gonna say
to my friend Tasha Yurick, who studies this. So that is
really
a problem.
Funny.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we could have a whole podcast on emotional intelligence on teams, but we'll save that for another day. I actually want to talk to you because you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I too liken leadership to parenting quite frequently. I can't, it's probably also parallels my own career. Like when I was put in care of other human beings in the workplace is also when I like simultaneous was like birthing children. So I've always seen the parallels. I've always seen the commonality between these two pursuits. You often are also comparing them and contrasting them. And I was reading some of your social content about like bad parent. If we parented,
I was going to say today's title.
Please say it.
If today's leaders led the way they parent, they get fired. I mean, that's just true. You'd be in, if they had the 360 review, you would be in with HR being like, we need remedial action now, or you're going to lose your job.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah. So, parenting used to be about, creating self-sufficiency, or imagine a multi-generational business that was about creating the next generation. And the article started off with an anecdote of an article of these parents in all of these WhatsApp and Facebook groups of their kids at college, like getting them play dates and checking on class, like literally destroying their kids' self-esteem and ability. And I've written about this a few times. I just think it's really interesting if we look at parenting through the lens of leadership. Like you would be dragged in, your team would be giving you 0 stars, and you say, I can't. Veronica's like, does all of my work, is always following on me, doesn't trust me. Like she's the worst leader ever. I think there's just not HR or 360 feedback at home. So and I have a hard time believing that those parents, and the article was a lot about the moms at the schools, but I have a hard time believing those parents who are micromanaging the crap out of their kids, who are also leading in the workplace, that doesn't spill over. Right. It's kind of a style, and they're the ones jumping in and solving the problems. And if you think about, I'm working on an article on this. If you think about, I'll ask you the quiz. What is it that sports coaches, who will say are leaders, what is the constraint that they have that no other leader has?
I love football, so I'm like, oh no.
What? Okay. So who's your favorite coach?
Well, I'm really into the Eagles this season in particular.
The Eagles, I forget who their coach is.
Nick Sirianni.
Yeah. So what is it that Nick Sirianni cannot do that you can do or anyone else can do in their leadership day-to-day of their team?
Like a trick question. I don't know the answer.
Sorry. It is a trick question. He cannot walk on the field and take the ball and do the play and say, this is how you do it, right? So in the coaching, and I know people don't like sports analogies, but I think that, or half the people don't, they're super instructive in leadership. What coaches focus on is practice.
And prep,
some in-game coaching and stuff, but then what do you do after the game? You recap and you debrief and you watch tape and you talk about next time, right? You are on the sidelines during the game, and great leaders really would be wise to follow that same analogy of you work on the practice, you work on the beforehand, you do the recap. But when the equivalent of the game is going on, you don't cross that line and jump in and interfere. You let it play out. So just a simple example of, right, I think in my post last week, the cleats, the kid forgets and I'll give you a work example and a parent example. Kid forgets the cleats, mom or dad, gets a call, panic, this is not the first time. Well, let's run them over, and do that. Great. Kid learns that when I forget the cleats, mom and dad will come bring the cleats. Alternative is, I can't bring the cleats right now, or we talked about this last week, like figure it out. So the kid's going to have to probably figure out how to borrow cleats and use some communication skills and ask a lot of people, talk to the coach and see what they can do or not do, and sit on the sideline and be embarrassed, or like, wear the sneakers and miss a bunch of the drills or what they're supposed to do, they're probably going to remember. Now, when they get home, the parent wouldn't say, I told you so, whatever. You'd say, look, we talked about it. This isn't the first time. Here are a couple ways that you could think about. You could put the cleats next to the door. You could leave a note up on the door. You could leave a thing on your cell phone. Like, I'm going to give you some ideas, but it's up to you to do it, because honestly, like the cleats aren't my problem. They're your problem. That kid is going to learn a lot more.
Sure.
And it's going to solve the longer problem, not the shorter problem.
Yeah.
Same example. Great sales leader, coaches, preps, either says nothing on the call or watches the call recording after as the rep blows the sale. And granted, this is not a bet the company 10 million enterprise sale, right? Blows the sale and then debriefs with them and lets them, again, have that organic cause and effect. Bad sales manager jumps in every time that the first time they start to struggle, takes over the call, and jumps onto the court and makes themselves the hero. Those are the same sort of behaviors in a leadership realm and in a management realm.
Well, I think there's some really beautiful examples, because one of the attributes that I hold in the highest regard is being resourceful. And so, like, even as a parent, if my kid misses homework, that's on them. I'm not reminding them of their right. So, but like, if I'm constantly hedging against their mistake or just anticipating where they'll screw up or forget something, then I'm never letting them create that muscle of resourcefulness. But same thing with like your teams. It's funny because I've been the recipient of new team members that were previously managed by another person who was more helicopter. You could tell, like, I could tell that they had more hands-on involvement, because when they came to me and I let them have like agencies and being an agent onto themselves, I was accused of not being helpful enough. And I was like, wait a minute. Like,
right. So that person's taught like learned helplessness, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it was funny how instead of, because one of my favorite books is Extreme Ownership, but like instead of looking at self, you're like, well, why do I feel like I need her to help me? And why did, I was the villain and I was the bad manager. I'm like, but wait a minute, like we're paying you over $100,000 a year to do this on your own. I'm only here in the regard, it's your point, only what a coach can do, but I can't play for you, right?
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy. Okay, so one thing that we do on our podcast at the conclusion of the podcast, which will be fun because you're also a podcast host, is I let the guest have the final question, so the tables get turned, swapped, and you can ask me whatever you'd like to ask me that I'm not prepared to answer.
For you, yeah. So what's been a challenge, either singular or repeated or personal or professional, a mistake that you've kind of learned the most from over your career?
I think if I'm being really honest, I have struggled with the case of being a rescuer. And this is something, ironically, that I try to teach my rainmakers. Like, marketers are marketers. We're not saviors. We're not supposed to be saviors. Don't allow yourself to walk into a situation where a company's asking you to save them, and then helping them
before you take that job. Make sure find out
why
they need to be saved, right?
Well, and prepping them with questions so they can ask these very specific questions in a job interview, to know that they're not walking into a booby trap where they're going to be put in an impossible situation. But ironically, that has come because I have done that to myself, where I have volunteered myself as like Hunger Games tribute too many times to count. And I don't know if that's more female than male. I don't know if that's me because I'm the oldest child and I've had to be second mom for my whole, like, I'm sure there's all of the above, like, you know what I mean? Like, multiple choice, all of the above I could attribute to a lot of things, both who I am, but also environmentally, how I was up, brought up, and my career background. But I have been a rescuer many times, but I've also volunteered in that position. And it's always been at my deficit. And it took me too long to figure that out, if I'm being radically honest.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment on that. I am, particularly the Great Resignation in marketing, I am shocked at how many people get so excited over the shiny new thing, understand that they're being sold and marketed an opportunity, and it's their job to do the due diligence and ask the questions. And because you hear, oh, so-and-so, and they're going to that, I'm like, that place is on fire. Like, what did they tell this person? And sometimes through desperation, people will offer people money and the promotion that they want, and then they're not going to tell them that they have 3 months of cash left. And I've seen this kind of over and over again. So yeah, it is incumbent upon, I think, you to do as much due diligence on these opportunities and not take everyone at their word. Recruiting is marketing, right? It's sales. The reality is
it is
what happens when you show up on the day one. And we looked at our organization, the people that I think left during the height of the Great Resignation, I would say half to 2/3 of those people weren't in that next job more than 9 months later, right? They were sold a story that wasn't true. They, and then they were embarrassed to call back or say they made a mistake or otherwise. So they get a call on Monday and they've accepted the job by Wednesday. Like that is not enough time. No, nothing good happens in haste like that. That is not enough time to make sure that you are entering a good situation.
Yeah. That's why they tell you hire slow, fire fast, but hire slow.
Take the job
on
slow.
Both sides.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. On both sides. And I teach my rainmakers, it's a two-sided interview. They're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them. Don't ever forget that this is a swap of mutually beneficial situations.
And people are impressed by the quality of questions that you normally ask.
Yes,
so
correct.
It benefits you, right?
Correct. 100%. Okay. Well, Robert, this has been a really timely but also enjoyable conversation for many, many reasons. So I just want to thank you profusely for coming on the podcast. We will, of course, link all your things in our show notes, but why don't you tell people how they can hang out with you further?
Yeah. Best way to find me, newsletter, podcasts, all that stuff, books, is at Robert Glazer, glazer.com. Also, I know a lot of people are looking to make those decisions, figure out kind of what are their values, what do they value. I have a core value course on there that over 2,000 people have taken. I think that's the missing key for a lot of people right now, which is like, what is it that I actually value, and how do I find people in situations that are aligned to that?
Love it. Well, thank you, Robert, so much for being on today's Rainmaker podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at @VRomney if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.